Hi, glad to see you on my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me. Have a good view. By early October 1942, the fighting for Guadalcanal Island had reached extreme tension. Both the Japanese and the Americans were throwing into the battle all the forces and resources they could muster. But only now, Admiral Yamamoto decided for the first time to send into battle his large artillery ships. True, they were just old line cruisers like Congo, but even their presence gave the Japanese a chance to turn the tide of the land battle. General Vandegrift's offensive. On September 18, 1942, a large American convoy of 6 transports arrived at Guadalcanal Island. The cost of its conduct was the loss of the aircraft carrier USP, but the arrival of reinforcements allowed General Vandegrift by September 19th not only to build a continuous line of defense around the perimeter of the bridgehead at Cape Lunga, but also to create a reserve for active operations. The Americans now had 19,200 men on the island. Nearly a month and a half after the landing, they could finally begin to destroy the enemy forces between Cape Lunga Point and the Matanikau River. The first such operation was conducted from September 23 to 27 by 3 battalions of Marines landed from landing barges at Cape Cruz, west of the mouth of the Matanikau River, supported by the destroyer Ballard. However, Vandegrift made the same mistake as Kawaguchi. He underestimated the strength and capabilities of the Japanese. The landing party was blocked by Akinosuke's Oki detachment west of Matanikau and was unable to advance any further. As a result, the Marines had to be taken out by sea with the support of the destroyer Ballard. Their losses amounted to 23 killed and 24 wounded. The second offensive operation was carried out from October 6 to 9, for it were allocated much larger forces. The Americans along the coast reached the mouth of the Matanikau River, 3 kilometers west of the Lunga perimeter, and attacked the recently landed units of the Japanese 2nd Infantry Division. Its 4th Regiment suffered serious losses. The Japanese had to withdraw behind the Matanikau River, which made it difficult for them to prepare for the next offensive. The third operation took place from October 9 to 11. Its purpose was to destroy the last Japanese bases in the eastern part of the island, in Iola Bay behind Cape Taivu, in 50 kilometers east of Lunga Point. Following the example of Edson's raid on September 9th, now the 1st Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment was to land from landing boats Higgins, near the villages of Gurabusu and Koilotumaria, and destroy the Japanese posts and warehouses located there. Alas, the second time the surprise did not work. During the landing was lost one boat, Higgins, with him killed 15 Marines and 3 sailors. 2 more soldiers died on shore. According to American reports, 35 Japanese were killed, but the stores could not be captured and destroyed. By this time, the main losses of the Marines were not from the effects of the enemy, but from disease, primarily malaria. By the second week of October, only in the 1st Marine Division, there were up to 700 sick. The next week, their number increased by another 655 people. Both sides were under tremendous strain. Both the Americans and the Japanese were looking for a way to break the stalemate. The sides were reinforcing their troops. With the availability of a large number of Higgins landing bots, the Americans were able to conduct raids along the coast and land troops anywhere on the island. Due to a severe shortage of forces, the Japanese were unable to cover the entire coast. Concentrating all the troops to storm the perimeter at Cape Lunga, they were forced to denude their rear bases. Therefore, the commander of the Japanese 17th Army in Rabaul, Lieutenant General Hyakutake Harukichi, who finally realized the real balance of forces, sought to move new troops to Guadalcanal as quickly as possible. The transfer by destroyers was carried out in small batches, but regularly, every night. One destroyer averaged about 150 men with arms, as well as some ammunition and food. In the last week of September, began transportation to Guadalcanal soldiers of the 2nd Japanese Infantry Division. On October 9th, General Hyakutake himself arrived on the island, and by the middle of the month there were the entire 2nd Infantry Division, 2 battalions of the 38th Infantry Division, a tank company, and a number of artillery units. In all, the Japanese forces on the island, including engineers, auxiliary, and medical personnel, reached 20,000 men, that is, finally equal to the enemy forces. At the same time, the Japanese Navy promised to help by shelling the Henderson Field airfield, and in Rabaul for action against Guadalcanal, transferred an additional 85 aircraft. In turn, the American Air Force at Henderson Field received another 23 fighters. By September 20th, the Japanese had a total of 117 planes in Rabaul, the Americans on Guadalcanal, 71 planes. On September 27th, after the weather improved, Japanese aircraft again attacked Henderson Field. In turn, on October 5th, American carrier aircraft attacked the Japanese base at Buin on Bougainville Island. On October 9th, Major Leonard C. Davis's 121st Marine Fighter Squadron, VMF 121, arrived on Guadalcanal, and fast transports carried the rear echelon of the 2nd Regiment, 2nd Marine Division. And still the most regular was the supply of Guadalcanal by air. Daily twin-engine Douglas delivered here aviation fuel. Alas, one of their flights was enough to deliver gasoline only for the departure of 12 Wildcats within an hour. Specially equipped submarine Amberjack for one flight carried 9,000 gallons of gasoline and 10 tons of bombs, but it was only one. At the same time, it was decided to begin replacing the Marines with Army forces by organizing the transfer of the America California Division to Guadalcanal. Colonel Bryant E. Moore's 164th Infantry Regiment, with a number of other units, totaling 3,132 men, was loaded onto troop transports AP-9 Zaylan and AP-10 Macaulay. On October 9th, they left Noumea escorted by 3 destroyers and 3 minesweepers. The convoy was escorted by all available naval forces, cruisers of the 64th Operational Connection of Admiral Scott, as well as aircraft carrier Hornet and battleship Washington. On the morning of October 13, the convoy arrived at Guadalcanal. After unloading, the infantrymen of the 164th Regiment were assigned a 6-kilometer stretch of frontage in the eastern part of the Lunga perimeter. The following night, the arriving men had to endure a severe ordeal. Henderson Field, under fire. The American victory at Cape Esperance on the night of October 12th was a serious slap in the face to the Japanese fleet, but it did not prevent the delivery of Japanese reinforcements to Guadalcanal. That night, 728 soldiers, 4 150mm howitzers, 2 field guns, and 1 anti-aircraft gun, as well as radio equipment and ammunition, were unloaded on the island. The howitzers and shells were rushed to the bridgehead at Cape Lunga. On the afternoon of October 12th, Japanese aircraft bombed Henderson Field airfield. By the morning of October 13th, there were 90 planes at the airfield, 45 bombers, and the same number of fighters. Around noon, the airfield was attacked by 24 Japanese long-range bombers from Rabaul, and 2 hours later, by 15 more of the same machines. The planes were coming at an altitude of 9,000 meters, so low-altitude Navy Wildcats simply could not get them. The Japanese managed to disable both runways and burn 5,000 gallons of jet fuel. The only American aerial victory of the day was credited to Captain Joseph J. Foss of the 121st Fighter Squadron, who had arrived on the island 4 days earlier. The airfield services, using all available equipment, feverishly began filling in craters to get the airfield back up and running. But toward evening, 150 mm howitzers unloaded by the Japanese the previous day came into play and opened fire on the repairmen. The guns were firing from the Kokumbon area, inaccessible to return fire from American field guns. Therefore, the destroyers Sterett, Gwyn, and Nicholas were sent to Cape Cruz without much success, trying to conduct counter-battery fire. By the end of October 13th, only the recently completed small strip for fighters remained airworthy. However, the worst was ahead. Line cruisers enter the battle. As early as October 5th, on Truk began preparations for the promised raid against Guadalcanal large gunships. The 3rd Battleship Division, Congo, and Haruna was allocated to the Special Bombardment Connection. Special 356mm fragmentation incendiary shells, Sansikidon Type 3, weighing 626 kilograms, with a thin body and high explosive content, were designed for coastal bombardment. They were originally designed to be fired from the main caliber at aerial targets. In addition to explosives, each projectile contained 480 rubber tubes filled with thermite mixture, as well as 192 steel impactors. However, these shells were in short supply, so only the Congo was able to receive them before leaving. On the Haruna were loaded conventional high-explosive shells, Type 0, with a remote fuse. Such a shell weighing 626 kilograms contained 29.5 kilos of explosives and 1,000 incendiary tubes filled with a mixture of rosin, magnesium, barium, and sulfuric acid. In addition, the battleship's ammunition included 674 kilograms thick-walled armor-piercing shells containing 11 kilos of explosives. On October 11th, the Japanese 2nd and 3rd Fleets moved south from Truk. Here were the 3rd and 11th Battleship Divisions, all 4 Congo-type ships, the 4th Cruiser Division, Atago, Takao, Maya, and Mayoko, the rest of the Vanguard connection of Rear Admiral Abe, heavy cruisers Suzuya, Tone, and Tikuma, as well as the 2nd and 10th Destroyer Squadrons, light cruisers Isuzu and Nagara, with 5 and 8 destroyers, respectively. Along with them was the 2nd Division of Aircraft Carriers, Rear Admiral Kakuta Kakuji, Hio, and Junyo, with 2 destroyers. A little behind followed Strike Aircraft Carrier Division of Vice Admiral Nagumo, aircraft carriers Shokaku, Zuikaku, Zuiho, as well as heavy cruiser Kumano and 8 destroyers. Separately held the 8th Fleet of Rear Admiral Mikawa, at this point engaged in conducting a convoy from Rabaul to Guadalcanal. October 12th, the day of the battle at Cape Esperance, the 3rd Battleship Division, under the direct command of Vice Admiral Kurita Takeo, moved to Guadalcanal, while the rest of the force took a position east of the Solomon Islands. Together with the battleships to Guadalcanalu, headed 2nd Destroyer Squadron Rear Admiral Tanaka Raizo, light cruiser Isuzu, and 9 destroyers, 6 of which separately left the island Shortland. Kurita's ships approached Guadalcanal late in the evening of October 13th. Because of problems at Henderson Field Airfield, U.S. air reconnaissance did not detect them. Shortly after midnight on the 14th, having passed Savo Island, Kurita put seaplanes in the air to illuminate the bombardment area. At 0137, approaching Cape Lunga, Congo opened fire on the area of Henderson Field Airfield. A few minutes later, it was joined by the trailing Haruna. After passing the Cape, the ships reversed course, deployed their turrets, and again shelled the shore. American 127mm artillery from the shore tried to fire back, at which point the battleships brought their 152mm casemate guns into action. The shelling lasted a little over an hour. The battleships fired a total of 868 main-caliber shells, an average of 54 shells per barrel, or a little more than half of their ammunition. Congo fired 104 Type 3 incendiary shells and 332 Type 1 armor-piercing shells, as well as 27 152mm mine counter shells. Haruna fired 189 Type 0 high-explosive shells and 294 armor-piercing shells, as well as 21 anti-mine shells. Meanwhile, Isuzu, with destroyers operating separately, shelled Tulagi Harbor. The torpedo boats of Lieutenant Montgomery's 3rd Squadron, PT-38, PT-46, PT-48, and PT-60, stationed here attempted to counterattack Admiral Tanaka's ships, but were easily repulsed by the fire of the destroyer Naganami. The torpedoes fired failed to reach their target, and one boat was damaged while grounded. At 0230, the Japanese ships left Iron Bottom Strait, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. Although not all the shells landed in the airfield area, the effect of the shelling was enormous. According to one Marine's recollection, coconut palms were wrenched out of the ground and tossed around like toothpicks. Huts and tents were blown away by the blast wave, and flames from burning gasoline illuminated the airfield area. 41 people died at the airfield, and more than 100 were wounded. Among the dead were Major Gordon A. Bell, commander of the 141st Dive Squadron, VMS B-141, and 4 of his pilots, Captains Edward F. Miller and Robert A. Abbott. Lieutenants Henry F. Cheney Jr. and George L. Haley. The aviation losses were enormous. About 50 planes were destroyed or severely damaged on the ground. By the morning of October 14th, only 7 dive bombers and 35 fighters had survived. But even for them, there was no fuel left. Most of the fuel reserves were burned. The pagoda, the wooden control tower of the airfield with all its equipment, was destroyed. The last convoy. Meanwhile, Rear Admiral Takama Tomotsu's so-called fast convoy was on its way to Guadalcanal with the last units of the 2nd Infantry Division. It left Rabaul on the night of October 12th. During the day, it was attacked twice ineffectively by American bombers from Guadalcanal, but did not achieve a single hit. On the night of October 12-13, the convoy was delayed at Shortland, but in the afternoon of the 13th, American aerial reconnaissance found it 70 miles northwest of Guadalcanal, going at a speed of 14 knots. The convoy included 6 fast troop transports: the Sasako Maru, Nankai Maru, Sato Maru, Sakito Maru, Kyushu Maru, and Adzumasan Maru. The 16th Infantry Regiment and headquarters of the 230th Infantry Regiment with its 2 battalions were loaded onto the ships, as well as 824 Marines from the 4th Regiment of the Maizuru Special Marine Landing Units. In addition to them, a battery of 100mm guns and a battery of 150mm howitzers, the 38th and 45th Field Anti-Aircraft Divisions, a battery from the 47th Field Anti-Aircraft Division, the 1st Company of the 38th Engineer Regiment, the 1st Independent Tank Company, the 6th Independent Machine Gun Battalion, a mortar company, the 76th Field Hospital, and other units, ammunition, and supplies were transferred. In all, the ships carried about 4,500 men, as well as Lieutenant General Maruyama Masao, commander of the 2nd Sendai Infantry Division. Air cover was provided by fighters of the 11th Air Fleet and Rabaul District, as well as Deck Zero from the aircraft carriers Hio and Junyo. In covering the transports were 8 destroyers Mikawa, Shiratsuyu, Ariake, Yudachi, Sigure, Akitsuki, Harusame, Samidari, and Murasame. Long-range cover of the convoy was carried out by Rear Admiral Mikawa himself, with heavy cruisers, Tiokai and Kinugasa, accompanied by destroyers, Amagiri and Mochizuki. On the morning of October 14th, the convoy arrived at Cape Tassafaronga, and at 6:05 began unloading. Shortly after dawn, the Americans discovered the Japanese transports standing off the coast and made every effort to organize an attack on them. There were few serviceable planes left at Henderson Field, but there was even less gasoline. It was drained from wrecked machines. The surviving canisters were searched for in all hiding places. At first, 6 Wildcats were sent out to attack the convoy, but they were not successful, losing 1 machine. About 8 a.m., they managed to refuel and equip 7 Dauntless dive bombers for the attack, but 2 of them crashed on takeoff, hitting craters on the runway. The other 5 attacked unloading Japanese transports, but achieved only 2 hits. Only by 10 o'clock, technicians managed to equip a new group, 12 dive bombers, 8 Wildcat, and 4 Army Aero Cobra from the 67th Fighter Squadron. Along with them flew Reconnaissance Catalina, equipped with 2 torpedoes. The Japanese ships were covered by about 30-0, but they could not stay in the area of Guadalcanal for too long, and by this time were forced to return to Rabaul. Therefore, the attack Dauntless opposed only anti-aircraft artillery destroyers. American pilots managed to sink the transport Sasako Maru 7180 BT, but it landed on the ground near the shore and was located on it. 230th Infantry Regiment was completely unloaded. Fires broke out on the other ships. At 11:45, transport Nankai Maru 8416 Bar T was the first to complete unloading and, escorted by destroyer Ariake, moved back. In these attacks, the Americans lost 6 planes, equal parts fighters and dive bombers. There was no more fuel on Guadalcanal, but at about 13 hours appeared over the island 11 flying fortresses coming from Espiritu Santo. They managed to sink the transports Adzumasan Maru 76624 BT and Kyushu Maru 8684 BT. The latter managed to unload tanks, but then caught fire, and around 1330 it exploded ammunition. Both transports remained above water, sitting on the ground. To avoid further losses, Rear Admiral Takama ordered the two remaining transports to stop unloading and withdraw to Savo Island, where they could maneuver freely, dodging bombs. After 1,700 hours, the transports returned to Cape Tassafaronga and completed unloading their equipment. At 1740, the ships were again attacked by 4 Dauntless from the aircraft carrier Hornet, this time unsuccessfully. Despite the loss of 3 of the 6 transports, the Japanese managed to unload all the soldiers and 80% of the cargo. The next night, on October 15th, having completely unloaded, the same type Sato Maru and Sakito Maru 7180 BT went on a return trip. On the way, they were unsuccessfully attacked by flying fortresses. On October 16th, the remnants of the fast convoy arrived at Bouin on Bougainville Island. At Cape Tassafaronga, underwater slope began near the shoreline, so above the water near the shore remained sticking out of the bow of the sunken ships. On October 15th and 16th, American flying fortresses again attacked them, mistaking them for newly arrived transports. After more damage to the Azuma-san Maru slipped off the shore and went to a depth of 50 meters. Everything possible to hold Guadalcanal. On the night of October 15th, Rear Admiral Mikawa arrived at Guadalcanal with 2 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers. From 149 to 216, the Teokai and Kinugasa shelled Cape Lunga with 203mm guns, firing 752 Type 0 high-explosive shells. The effect of this bombardment was much more modest than it had been 2 days earlier. On the night of October 16th, the airfield was shelled by the heavy cruisers Mayoko and Maya from the 4th Cruiser Division of the 2nd Kurita Fleet's 4th Cruiser Division, arriving with 6 destroyers of the 2nd Division. Rear Admiral Takagi Takeo led the bombardment. The ships fired 9 and 12 shells of 203mm caliber, part of the Type 3 high-explosive incendiary shells, part of the conventional Type 0 armor-piercing shells. Meanwhile, on October 14th, the line cruisers Congo and Haruna returned north and rejoined Abe's vanguard force. On 17 to 18th October, they refueled at sea, and with the rest of the ships held north of the Solomon Islands, waiting for the denouement. On October 18th, Vice Admiral Robert L. Gormley, commander of U.S. naval forces in the South Pacific, was removed from his post and replaced by Vice Admiral William F. Halsey. He was sent about 50 fighters as reinforcements from the Central Pacific, and several new flying fortresses arrived at Espiritu Santo at the disposal of Admiral Aubrey Fitch. From the island of Oahu to New Caledonia sent the 25th Infantry Division. Here also redirected about 30 submarines. Finally, the Enterprise, which had just completed repairs, returned to the 62nd Operations Force. "I will send to this area all possible weapons to hold Guadalcanal," President Roosevelt told the Chiefs of Staff Committee. After the events of October 13-15, there was a lull on Guadalcanal, but it was purely external. General Hyakutake scheduled a new offensive for October 22nd. The main blow to the American bridgehead was to be struck by General Maruyama's 2nd Infantry Division, which was advancing on Edson's Ridge from the southeast. The movement of the division and its equipment through the rugged jungle south of Cape Lunga Point, along the so-called Maruyama Trail, began. This land offensive led to a new carrier battle off the Santa Cruz Islands. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me. See you soon.